Hi, welcome to the Coffee with Lisa podcast. I believe that everyone in business has missing structures and endless possibilities to create new opportunities. The challenge is most don't know how to leverage the relationships for a win-win. I believe that your relationships will make the difference in the results you'll achieve, the impact you will have, and the speed in which you will make opportunities happen. I believe that you can see things through, but you often struggle to see through things. I'll make the invisible visible, the complex simple. Because of these beliefs, I created the Coffee with Lisa podcast and have invited the best experts to join me and share their experiences and knowledge with you so you can move faster and gain a competitive advantage in life and in business. Good morning. Welcome to the Coffee with Lisa podcast. Today I have America's leading reading ambassador on the show, and I'm so excited for you guys to meet Dr. Danny Brassell. And I had the distinct honor and privilege of meeting Danny last summer for the very first time, and my life has been forever changed. This man has more enthusiasm in his back pocket than I have ever met anybody on planet Earth for reading. So I'd like to welcome Danny to the show. Hey, Danny.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I appreciate it. And thanks for viewing, everybody.
Yes. For those of you who happen to be watching and you're on my personal page, you need to hop over to Lisa Patrick Ph.D. in order for us to see your comments. StreamYard has a glitch going on right now, and they're working feverishly with Facebook to fix it. So, well, Danny, so what have you been up to besides reading? Because I can see all the books in the background. You've clearly done a lot of reading in your entire life. We're now in quarantine. What a great opportunity to read some more. What's the latest that you've been reading?
Oh, I mean, I'm reading like crazy right now. Somebody just asked me that. I'm reading about 30 or 40 books a week at this point because I'm reading with my kids. I'm reading for me. I'm reading with my wife. I read a biography once called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt about President Teddy Roosevelt. It's a fantastic book by Edmund Morris. And in the book, it said by the time he was 30 years old, President Roosevelt had read over 30,000 books. And so when I was teaching my little ones, I used to tell my students, I'm like, so we got to start reading a lot of kid books. And so I read 10 books a day now, I always tell people. I mean, many of them are scratch and sniff and pop up, but I do read 10 books a day. And I'm a very eclectic reader. I'll read anything and everything. I have one of the top book clubs online called lazyreaders.com, where every month I provide 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So somebody stuck in a doctor's office has something to read. Because I always tell people, you never know when you're going to be stuck somewhere. And that's a great thing about cell phones now is you always have something to read on you. And so I'm just passionate about this. I'm actually probably one of the few people that just thinks the pandemic's the greatest thing. I'm getting to spend all this time at home with my kids. We're reading like crazy. I'm a person that still likes physical books. And so I'm ordering books on Amazon, but actually my favorite site is Thrift Books because you can get a used copy of the book for a lot cheaper. And, I read the book and I usually just donate it to a classroom teacher. So it's not a big deal. These are the books. If it stays on my shelf, it means it has so many great ideas. I had to keep that book.
Wow. Well, Thrift Book. Now, I've never heard of that before. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. I'm going to have to put that in our comments below. I happen to have read this particular and it was seen on TV.
Yeah. I was in a crowd shot once at a ball game, so I can put that.
Well, you know what? I have to say, I'm like you. I'm old school thinking in the fact that I like the look, I like the smell of the pages, I like the feel of the book. I mean, I love Audible as well, and there are some books that I definitely listen to via Audible. But those specific books that, you can write in the margins and take notes and reread again, and use kind of as a textbook, if you will, are, we need these books.
Yeah.
And these books are getting lost in the world today. And I hope that, public libraries and so forth, it's great to have online. But what are your thoughts about that? What do you think the future holds for libraries?
Well, I just think that it's like everything. Change is, Stephen Wright said, change is inevitable unless you're at a vending machine. Well, change is happening. The world is changing all the time. And I don't think we should fear technology. I think we should embrace it. So people like you and me, Lisa, there's always going to be a demand for physical books because some people like physical books. My wife, on the other hand, she loves her Kindle. And I can make the argument for the Kindle as well. I mean, so for example, my wife is from Singapore, and so every other year we fly to Singapore. It's about 15 hours with our 3 kids, and they're usually puking on me within the first 10 minutes. And I always have to pack about 20 books in my bag, but my wife packs this little 1 pound, 6 ounce Kindle, and she has access to the entire world's library. Secondly, we both like to read in bed, and it drives my wife crazy because I always have to have the lamp on in bed. She doesn't need that because her Kindle illuminates itself. And then finally, I'm getting kind of older, and some of the print in some of these books is very difficult for me to read. My wife never has that problem because on the Kindle you can adjust the font size. So I always tell people there's lots of, different strokes for different folks. My mission is to get people excited about reading, and I keep on hearing all the statistics. Kids don't read today. I'm like, really? Because I see kids with their heads down all the time. I mean, if they're watching videos, that's one thing, but most of them are at least scrolling through text. And I believe that kids are actually getting a lot more prints than they did 100 years ago.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we're going to go back to that for a second. I have to know, because when we had our very first conversation, I don't believe I asked you this, so I'm going to ask you now. Whatever sparked your passion and love for reading?
Well, that's funny, Lisa, because when I was a kid, I hated reading. My father was a librarian, and I always hated the public library. They always smelled funny. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always some freaky guy by the bookshelves who thinks he's a vampire. I always was freaked out at public libraries. And then when I first started teaching in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles, I worked with students that most of them came from single parent households. Most of them were considered low socioeconomic status. They had very limited resources. The schools had limited resources. There were actually no bookstores in a city of over 100,000 people. And it really made me point the finger at myself and say, shame on me. Because, Lisa, I realized I grew up with all kinds of advantages that I never really saw, and I didn't take advantage of them. I mean, I had both of my parents. My parents both constantly read to us kids. They read in front of us kids. We had tons of reading resources in my home. And I realized not all kids get that. And it really made me angry that I didn't see the opportunities presented to every kid like that. And so that's what really made me passionate about it more than anything. I'd actually created a nonprofit that created school libraries in my school district. And then I still saw the kids wouldn't actually go to the school library. So then I started working directly with the teachers on creating classroom libraries. And now really my passion is working with the parents at home on giving them all kinds of ideas on some simple things that they can do with their kids. So it's a passion out of being ticked off that not everybody has the same opportunities. And I want to make sure everybody has at least the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, and whether they execute on those opportunities is really up to them, but providing them the possibility to create themselves a new opportunity is really important. So thank you for that. You talked a little bit about, today a lot of parents are stuck at home during this quarantine and COVID-19 and are having trouble getting their kids to really read, not just academically what they need to get done, but have a love of reading. And so what are some of those, we can't force our kid and we can't bribe our kid, right? They're not stupid. So what's some of the ways that that work effectively over the years to help parents out there who are really trying to get their kids to read?
That's great, Lisa. So, I have the world's top online reading engagement program. It's called read-better-in-67steps.com, where basically in 67 days, just over 2 months, I get kids to read more, read better, and love reading. I mean, parents love it because in just a couple of months, their kids boost their reading ability by usually about 2 to 3 grade levels. Schools love it because it's a great way to involve the parents in their kids' education. But what's more important to me, what's near and dear to my heart, is that in just over 2 months, I got kids that used to hate reading that love reading, and they do it as a lifelong passion. They don't do it because somebody's telling them to do it. I mean, I've never had to tell kids, you know, go watch TV. I've never had to tell kids, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell kids, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own. And so, you know, Lisa, you were kind enough to have me on today. I wanted to make sure to serve your audience. So I'm going to give a freebie to everybody. If people, we create a special website just for your audience called freereadingtraining.com. So if any of your viewers go to freereadingtraining.com, they'll get a free copy of the book that you had in your hand, my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed, which is a book. I wrote that for a school principal who didn't know how to engage his faculty. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. And so once a week, I give you a positive concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you might be too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You know, kids need to see us reading. And then I'm also going to throw in 2 digital trainings for parents on ideas on how to get their kids excited about reading. I mean, there's one here. I'll just give all of your viewers a quick win right now. You know, I know in Canada, it's very similar to America, is all the television sets in Canada have to have closed captioning on them. So the first thing I always tell parents is just turn on the closed captioning. I mean, I'm sure you never had this problem, Lisa, with your daughters, because you know, girls are usually a lot easier. It's the boys that usually have the problem. But people say, well, wait a sec, Danny, if I turn on the closed captioning and the subtitles are in English and the show's in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a good point, but here's the point I make to people. How many of you have ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the words at the bottom of the screen? It's very tough. Your brain is directed towards that text. And I got this idea for 2 reasons. First of all, a friend of mine used to teach first grade, and the best reader he ever had was deaf. And he had a parent conference with the parents who could hear, and he asked them, well, why is your son such a good reader? And they said, closed captioning since birth. The other reason is if you look at reading research around the world, and I'm sure you're really into this, Lisa, reading academic research all the time. But if you look at the studies around the world.
Daddy. That's why you're on the show.
Great nighttime reading. So if you look at the reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, what do you think happens to their reading score? Does it go up or does it go down? I mean, the research shows it always goes down the more you watch TV, except for one country. The country that watches the most TV has the highest reading scores in the world, and it's Finland. And the reason is because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they do is they import like Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch from the United States, but then they have to put subtitles on it for the kids. The kids are reading the subtitles all the time. So that's a real quick win for all parents out there. Just turn on the closed captioning. It's a real easy way to get you and your kids doing a little bit of extra reading every day.
Well, and the great thing, thank you for bringing that point up, because the great thing is now with all the video that we consume, much of the video that we do consume has closed captioning.
Yeah.
As long as somebody actually pays attention and actually goes through and edits the closed captioning. Yeah. But, you know, that's a great point, because that forces a lot of people who don't audio listen to it to actually visually read it. Mm-hmm. And closed cap, I've never ever thought of it that way. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm out. I got to give you one thing.
Well, you know what? Warren Buffett says, go to bed smarter than when you woke up. So I'm going to go to bed smarter today because I learned something new.
Well, there you go. Well, and also make sure, Lisa, and I know you do this, is before you go to bed, read something, but make sure it's positive. I always tell people, turn off the TV news and read a funny children's book. You know, you'll live a much longer, happier life. I can already tell you what's on the news tonight. You know, the world's coming to an end, and whoever your country's leader is doing a bad job. It's been the same negative news for the last 100 years. You know, read a funny children's book. You'll impress your friends. You can say, you know what? I read a book cover to cover yesterday. And people are like, really? What was it about? It's about this little red hen. Very, very interesting book.
So, Danny, I know that you read a lot of books. So tell me, what is your belief on retention of a book? How many times do you have to read a book in order to actually retain the content within the book? Because you read a lot of books a day. Do you retain everything that you're reading in that day?
Yeah, that's what kind of cracks me up. You'll hear Woody Allen used to have a good line about that. He said, "Oh, I took a speed reading course. You know, I read War and Peace in 20 minutes. It's about Russia." Yeah. You know, I mean, just because you read something doesn't mean you retain the information, really. So this is, again, without getting real academic, it's a real basic. You know, if you're interested in something, you retain the information. If you're not interested, you know, it's sort of like the old vocabulary test. You know, people always, the way I still see it in classrooms to this day, where the way they teach vocabulary in schools is every Monday morning, the kids get a list of 20 words, and the kids are told they have to study those words because they have to take a test on them on Friday. And every now and then you have an annoying teacher who tells you have to use the words in sentences. And if you were an obnoxious child like I was, you would put all the words into a single sentence. Well, then Friday morning, you take the test, you get 100%, and I guarantee you 9 out of 10 kids, those words are out of their brains before the cartoons start on Saturday morning because they were meaningless to them. The way you make anybody retain information is you create a meaningful experience. You know, I can speak to thousands of people every single year, and I'm not going to remember you because you're just one of 1,000. But if you, Lisa, you come up to me after a presentation and you're like, "Oh, Danny, you know, your presentation really moved me. Would you father a child with me?" Well, now I'm going to remember Lisa. Oh yeah, that lady. You know, that we just create a meaningful experience. You know, what are you doing to stand out? And so that's one of the things, the whole basis of my engagement program is it doesn't really take a whole lot to get your kids to remember information. And so even with my own kids, when we're reading a boring book, because I think it's important to read boring books to teach kids how to deal with stuff they're not interested in. And so I just make it into a game. And so, like, when my kids were little, you know, every page they would tell me to do it in a different voice. Like, do it like a robot, do it like a robot. So I'm like, "Once upon a time, there were 3 bears." Like, do it like a pirate, do it like a pirate. Arr, once upon a time, arr. You know, and so you're taking something that's lame and you're making it interesting. That's the big thing is, if you really want to retain information, you have to make it engaging. And that's what, you know, great teachers always do. And,
well, that works for the little boy who's 7 or the little girl who's 5. What do you do with the kid who's 15, who's 17? Because they're going to laugh you out of their room if you're.
So for my teenagers, if you really want a teenager to do something, tell them not to do it. That's the easiest way I always suggest to it. Because I've taught all age level. I started off as a secondary teacher, high school teacher. Then I went to middle school, upper elementary, lower elementary, preschool. So I've taught all ages, and I've taught university level as well. And as the kids, especially the teenagers, they get cooler, and so you try to kind of challenge them on things. And so I once had to teach the book As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And, you know, to a lot of kids, it's kind of a boring book, but I would always tell the kids, I'm like, "Man, you should read this book. I liked it so much, I memorized an entire chapter. I can actually tell you the whole chapter. So read the book and see if you can figure out which chapter I memorized." Because it's around page 83, because that book is written from points of view of different characters. I can't remember the kid's name, but there's this one kid, and the chapter is "My Mother is a Fish." And that's the whole chapter. And usually, so the kids have gotten to page 82, they're like, "Man, you tricked us, you tricked us." And that's what I like to do that. I was blessed when I was in 7th grade, which is, you know, so around 13 years old. My 7th grade reading teacher was a guy by the name of Will Hobbs. Will is now one of the best-selling young adult authors in the world. He writes books that are especially popular with teenage boys, a lot of outdoor adventure books. A lot of them take place in Canada. One of the things that I love about him,
is he Canadian?
No, I don't know where he's originally from. I grew up in Durango, Colorado, and Will, he had 5,000 books in his classroom, and every day at the beginning of class, he would tell us what he was reading. We would tell him what we were reading, and the rest of the 15-minute period, we read. Whenever we finished a book, we'd go up to Mr. Hobbs. He'd put down the book he was reading. He'd look through our book, ask us 3 or 4 questions, and if He was satisfied with our answers. He gave us a point. Every book up to 200 pages was worth 1 point. Every extra 100 pages was worth another point. You needed 25 points to get an A, and the top 5 point totals had their names written on the wall. And I wanted my name written on that wall. So I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, 500-page book, 4-point book. Also, an excellent Disney film starring James Mason and Kirk Douglas. And I didn't really feel like reading a 500-page book, so I took the book up to Mr. Hobbs. He asked me 4 questions, and I learned a valuable lesson that day. Book ain't always like the movies.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. And Mr. Hobbs gave me the 4 points, and that gave me a great teaching trick. His guilt works, because I read every word of every page of every book from that point forward, wound up with 44 points, well above and beyond what I had to do. Will Hobbs had the greatest reading strategy I've ever seen a teacher use. So let me share it with you right now. He found out what I was interested in, which was football. And at least once a week, he'd come up to me with a football book. He'd say, "Hey, Danny, check out this book about the Denver Broncos. I know you'll like it." What are the odds I open up that book? Well, in my experience, 100%. Doesn't matter what the age. The kid might not read it, but they're going to open it. And also I have found by the 4th time I do that with a kid, they're going to try and read that book, because there's nothing more powerful than somebody significant in your life, a teacher, a coach, a parent, a pastor, a buddy, an older sibling saying, "You know what, I was thinking of you when I was reading this." And so, I have 3 kids, 2 of them are teenagers right now, and that's the way I encourage them. I say, "Well, what do you like to read? What would you like to read?" And I still read in bed with my kids. Right now I'm reading with my oldest daughter is 16, and so we're reading Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series together, which is a series, and there's a TV show based on it. My son and I are reading The Great Train Robbery by Michael Crichton. He's the guy that wrote Jurassic Park, and it's such a good book. The Great Train Robbery is a fantastic book. And then my youngest daughter, she's 11, and we're reading A Year Down Yonder by Richard Peck, it won the Newbery Award. It's about this teenage girl that has to live a year with her grandma in rural Illinois, and grandma is a piece of work. And I mean, one of the best written books. It's like reading Mark Twain. It's so well written, So I love those experiences, because then, you get into conversations with your kids. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. Well, and you know what? It's the imagination sparks up great conversations. And I don't think we have enough conversations with our kids. And one of the things that I think, a lot of parents are realizing during this time is they're reconnecting with their children, whether they're using it through reading or playing games, like actual board games, not video games, going back to old school thinking.
Yeah, no, I've been pointing this out. I'm still doing about 3 or 4 virtual trainings a day with different school districts. And I keep on telling people, in Chinese, the character for the word crisis is actually 2 symbols. One means danger and the other one means opportunity. And I think right now is an incredible opportunity for us. I mean, this is your field too, Lisa, is how do we rethink education? How do we make it more engaging for a much larger population? And, I think all of a sudden a lot of people are saying, well, I hate doing online. But then a lot of people are like, oh, I like doing online. And so this is kind of opening up our buffet of options for students. And hopefully we learn the lesson afterwards, and we make sure to accommodate the needs of different learners out there.
Absolutely. Well, and you may or may not know this, but I recently partnered with Dr. Tony Alessandra, and one of the assessments that we have in our portfolio is a learning assessment. And I think that learning assessment is going to be even more important than it was prior to today and prior to COVID-19, because what it's doing is it's actually allowing us to really understand who our students are, who we are as learners, and what are the best ways that we learn. So some people, I think, who've never been exposed to learning opportunities online are loving it and realizing the potential and the ability of new opportunities via learning online. And other people who are realizing, I'm not an online learner. I need to be in the classroom. I need to be hands-on. What does that look like? And so I think, it's interesting that COVID-19 is, to me, is the biggest focus group for many different outlets, not just for learning and not just for education, but, working from anywhere. All of a sudden corporations have to abide by everybody being not in the office and being at home, and they're working from anywhere. And how do they implement that moving forward? And will that be a portion of what new workplace looks like? And so how do you, when you're talking, because you do a lot of corporate training, so let's talk a little bit more. We've talked a lot about parents and teachers. How do you help CEOs and the C-suite and small business owners and solopreneurs really bring reading into the workplace? And what is the advantage of doing that?
Oh, that's a cool question, Lisa. You went through a lot. First of all, it's awesome that you're working with Tony. Tony Alessandra has been at the cutting edge for 40 years, and he's also a great human being, which is even better. And you attract good people, Lisa, because you're a good person. So, and you touched upon one of the A's, which is assessment. But to me, and this applies to corporate, it applies to public schools, it applies to everybody. The word that we don't really talk about is accountability. And that's what I've been really stressing to people lately is, especially if I'm working with, so I've got millions and millions of people around the world that all of a sudden have found themselves thrust as involuntarily homeschooling their kids, and they have no idea what to do. And to me, it's all about accountability, and accountability lies with the student. It lies with the parent. It's with the school. All of us have to have accountability. When I was a school administrator, I used to always tell people, if you have an excuse, here's the excuse I want you to use from now on. Peru has a new dictator. And people are like, what's that mean? I'm like, well, one excuse is as good as another. It didn't get done, did it? Don't waste my time. Let's have accountability involved. So that's why my program is very simple. So the reason we designed it for 67 days is you'll hear a lot of people say it takes 21 days to change a habit. Well, this is an urban myth. Show me the research on that. It doesn't exist. I actually know where the number originally came from. It came from a wonderful book written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics. Now, Dr. Maltz was a plastic surgeon, and in the preface of the book, he said he noticed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new face. Well, a lot of personal development gurus people that I respect, took that number and started saying, oh, it takes 21 days to change a habit. Well, that drives me nuts, because in 2009, researchers at the University of London decided to do a habit formation study. And in their research, they found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit. And the average was 66 days. Now, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67 days to change a habit. And it depends on the type of habit. So like they found, if you want a glass of water before all of your meals, it might be 18 days to make that into a habit. But if you want to quit smoking, that's going to take 254 days. And here's why this is critical for everybody to know this, is let's say you follow a diet religiously for 21 days. But on day 22, you fall off the wagon. You go back to your old patterns. Well, you blame yourself. Well, research shows it takes at least 3 times that long on average to change a habit. And so what I'm trying to do, I think schools do a decent job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I need to teach kids why to read so that they'll be self-motivated, self-accountable. And what I'm looking for is 20 minutes a day. This is the entire goal of the program. And any CEO could do the same thing if they wanted to incorporate reading. 20 minutes a day. Harvard did a study. I always say Harvard did the study. It sounds much more legitimate that way. So Harvard did a study. They looked at kids' reading habits around the world, and they were trying to figure out patterns, and they found one that was very startling to them. They looked at the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. They looked at the 20th percentile, the 70th percentile, and the 90th percentile. The kids at the bottom of class, in the 20th percentile, they average less than a minute a day of reading outside of school. That's not really surprising. That's probably why they're at the bottom of the class. But then you look at the 70th percentile, the middle of the class, the C students. They average 9.6 minutes a day. And so if I'm doing a parent training, this is when the room gets real quiet and the first parent raises their hand and says, wait a sec, Are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day at home, I can take him from an F to a C? I'm like, that's exactly what I'm saying. The research is pretty conclusive on this. But what was more stunning was the top of the class, the 90th percentile. Were those kids reading 3 hours a day outside of school? No. Were they reading 1 hour a day outside of school? No. The average was just under 21 minutes, 20 minutes a day, and they don't have to be consecutive. So I always tell parents, heck, the most read item every single morning is not the newspaper, it's the back of the cereal box. So one quick win is make sure you have magazines, newspapers, and books on the breakfast table so the kids have something to read while they're eating. My own kids, while I'm making their lunches in the morning, usually what I do is I open up my laptop, and there's this great program free of charge from the Screen Actors Guild called StorylineOnline.net, where they get different actors and entertainers to read aloud books, and every read aloud is also closed caption. They all take about 10 to 15 minutes, so we just covered 10 to 15 minutes right there. If we're driving to school, if it takes you 10 minutes each way to drive back and forth to school, put a book on tape on. The kids that they're listening to something that way. There's easy ways to get those minutes, and a lot of it is just even discussing books and stuff. I read an article. It was Fidel Castro, when it was this communist Cuba. It was interesting, at cigar factories, while the different employees were rolling the cigars, there was actually a person paid to stand at a microphone and read books to the workers all day as they were rolling cigars, and they had one of the highest literacy rates in the world. It's crazy. So I'm like, it's not rocket science. It's the little things. It's the same as healthy reading habits are like healthy habits. You don't have to sprint a mile every day. You just have to walk every day. And it's going to have benefits for your health. You don't have to become a vegetarian, but by eating more vegetables in your diet and drinking more water, these are things that are going to help you. It's the same thing with reading, and I always tell people the research, Harvard's done studies on this. The research is really clear about this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. I got a lot of parents that are worried about their sons reading nothing but Captain Underpants. I'm like, hey, the little boy who reads Captain Underpants is going to be a better reader than the little boy that's not reading anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare. So let's never knock that.
It's funny you say that, Danny, because my one daughter, when she was younger, she didn't like to read and she had trouble reading. And God bless her teacher, because her teacher said, go and get comic books.
Right.
We called them comic books, but they have a different name now. Anyways, go to that section of Chapters or Indigo and start buying those books. And that's what we did. And she's actually my better reader of my two daughters now. She does more reading than the other daughter does. But it was because of that. It didn't matter. And this is what the teacher told me. It didn't matter what she's reading, as long as she's reading something. And if it's small bite-sized pieces at a time, that makes it easier and increases her confidence.
Yeah. And comic books and graphic novels, they're actually written at about 3 grade levels above network news. So they're actually getting better vocabulary and better fluency. It's the truth. It's a great way to connect with. When I do corporate trainings, I have all these important looking people in suits in the room. And I always ask the room, what was your favorite book growing up? 70% of the audience is like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. Those work. I read tons of biographies. And this is one of the things I always point out to people. I'm like, I read all these biographies of successful people, and what's the one common element in most successful people? Most of them dropped out of school. What the heck are we doing wrong in school? These people were self-motivated. They were self-accountable. And most of them, you talked about Warren Buffett earlier. Warren Buffett, the guy goes into his office every day and he basically reads for 8 hours. This is what successful people are doing, is they're reading constantly.
100%. Well, Patricia Fripp, who you met at the same time with me last summer, her brother is the Robert Fripp, who is a very world-renowned musician over in England, and he has a reading coach. And from my understanding of, when Fripp and I were talking, is the room that he has for his reading is full. It's a massive library, and his coach actually teaches him and tells him and guides him on what book next. He's an avid reader, and it's interesting that the most successful people, if you actually follow the most successful people, they all read. They all are a firm believer of continuous learning. And whether it's, I always had the rule of 10 minutes a day, but now I'm going to switch that to 20 minutes a day now that I've had this conversation. But it's so important. I mean, it's what guides us, is what gives us the knowledge. It's what gives us opportunities. I mean, if we're not continually learning, how are we improving?
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And I love that. Well, first of all, someday I hope to be like the Robert Fripp. I mean, when you have the in front of your name, that's even better. I want to be the Danny Brassell. That would be fantastic. But what the other thing that you said, which resonated with me, Lisa, is he was smart enough to hire a coach. And you and I are those types of people. Is when we have a skill that we want to get better at, we don't try and learn it on our own. We hire a coach, and that's what successful people do all the time. I mean, whether you're an athlete or a politician, you need those mentors and those people that are going to hold you accountable and also show you the path.
Well, and they don't just hire one, they hire numerous with very skilled areas of expertise. I am a firm believer that you master the craft that you are really good at, and you hire out your weaknesses. But you do want to have enough knowledge in your weakness area to understand who to hire.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. Lots of charlatans in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So, I always close my show with a couple questions. So first of all, I want to know, Danny, if you were to give your younger 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Enjoy the ride. I don't have regrets. I think regrets are a waste of time. And I always used to tell my students, I played high school football with guys that still today talk to me about our time playing high school football together. I always say the windshield's a lot bigger than the rearview mirror. Let's look forward. Let's not look back. And so my 20-year-old self, I'm like, you know what? You're going to make tons of mistakes. You're going to have lots of successes, but enjoy the ride.
I love that. I love the rear view mirror analogy, because I think that if we get stuck in the past, we never can move forward. So I love that. And when you were talking about corporations and, different ways that leaders can instill it, this thought came to me about gamification in the workplace. And I don't know. And if somebody is out there listening and an actual leader does this, let us know and drop us a comment below. But we have book clubs, and, I have been asked a number of times, do you want to be part of a ladies book club? But really, we're reading 10 minutes a day, or we're talking about the book, but we're really having a glass of wine.
That's right.
But I don't organizations that actually instill the 20-minute rule book club within the organization. And, when you come to work that day, that you have to read 20 minutes of some book. I think that would be really valuable to a team, especially if you were the leader and you were determining what those books were, to help move your business and move your team along and get to that next level and to that next level. Have you ever heard of anything like that before, Danny?
I've seen a few. I mean, the modification I would make to most people is when they start a book club, everybody has to read the same book, but what's meaningful to you might not be meaningful to me. And it's just going to become a chore after a while. And so I would allow the flexibility, so with schools, one of the ways I talk to administrators, I say, well, why don't you ask every single one of your teachers outside their classroom door to have a photocopy of the cover of the book that they're reading. And so that way we can talk to each other about, oh, what are you reading? Oh, you're reading the latest book by Chip and Dan Heath. That's fascinating. There's some really interesting strategies. I just read this cool book called Mindless Eating, which gives you all kinds of interesting ways to make your diet, simple things that we can do to our diet so that we can lose weight over time. I mean, I get some of my best ideas from books that have nothing to do with what I'm interested in. That's why I'm a part of masterminds, is because I love being in a room with people from completely different fields and saying, how can I take the idea that realtor is using in real estate and apply it to reading? And I'm sure that they're doing the same thing. It's like, how do you take that education idea that Lisa just gave me and apply it to manufacturing? And that's why you want to surround yourself with people. You know, I love being around people with different viewpoints and different ideas, because it challenges my brain to look at things from totally different points of view. And it goes to what you were saying earlier: constant and never-ending improvement, continuous learning.
Absolutely. Well, and as Adam Vasquez would say, that's how you interrupt markets, by using market invention, by taking a thought or a mindset from one vertical and applying it back to your vertical. And that's how you interrupt markets, right?
And Adam has a great book, that book, Toothfish. I read that in about 2 hours on a flight. And that book was a gem just for the story of the toothfish, about just the way you rename things. It kind of applies to another book I had read by Frank Luntz, is a political consultant. You'll see him on Fox News a lot. And he's an advisor usually to, in America, we have the Republicans and the Democrats, and he's usually an advisor to Republican campaigns. And I think, well, that's very narrow. If Democrats are silly not to listen to him, because he's a master at the way you say things makes people look at him in different points of view. I mean, you see politicians do it all the time. You can call it COVID-19, or you could call it the Chinese virus. Well, that's going to create different points of view based on the way you phrase it. And Frank Luntz, it's a fascinating book about human psychology. I mean, it would just be like a basic thing I could do with kids. I'm like, okay, we have to read 20 minutes a day, or I can say we get to read 20 minutes a day. Just a simple word changes the viewpoint.
Absolutely. Well, I was with a few months ago, I was down in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was speaking with a gentleman, Jonathan Hawkins, and he was talking about now he was I think he was an interrogator for the military for a number of years, but he was talking about the difference between the word discover and learn when you're doing marketing copy. And discovering means that you're thinking about things differently and you're discovering new things. But learning means it's a task and you have to do something. So always discover versus learn, because it activates how you think about things differently in your mind. And one is I got to do something, versus, oh, that's exciting. And so, that there's a real science behind that, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we choose our words and how people interpret those things. I love it.
Absolutely. Well, Danny, thank you very much for coming today and on the Coffee with Lisa show. I am writing a book, if you didn't know. Nice. So I'm actually writing 2 books. So I'm writing one book with a gentleman by the name of Jim Cathcart. I don't know if you know Jim.
Jim's great. He's great, and he's a giver too.
He's a giver, so he wrote the Acorn Principle. And then I'm writing a second book. I got challenged by Coach Michael Burt a few weeks ago to write a book called The Queen of Persistence. And so I'm also writing on that one as well. But I look forward to sending copies to you.
Awesome. And my challenge is finish them. I have 81 first chapters to books.
Oh, God bless you. Well, I actually happen to have the person in mind that could help you with that.
There you go.
Be healthy and safe. And until we meet again very soon, hopefully, thank you very much for joining me on the Coffee with Lisa podcast.
Thanks for all that you do, Lisa. God bless.
Thank you.